And a good Wednesday afternoon to everybody. 3 o'clock on the East Coast, noon here in Las Vegas Pacific time, and it's great to be with you for another edition of Daily Distinction as we're going along here. And I am so excited about today. I have been talking about this for the last couple of days, and I'm really excited about today because I've got such a good pal coming up here with me. But before we get started, as people are signing on, a couple things I want you to know. I have heard from 3 different people today whose cars have been broken into while they were at the grocery store in 3 different cities. And was talking with my friend Larry Wingett about it. And you know Larry's one of my best pals. And Larry's son is on the SWAT team. He's a police officer in Phoenix. And this is something that they've been predicting for a while. And the reason is because if your job is burglary and everybody's home, you got to find someplace else to steal. And so please be aware that there are more burglaries and more things going on in parking lots like at supermarkets, because they know you're going to be in there shopping probably for a while. And please take care, because we'd hate to see that happen to anybody who is here with Daily Distinction. Phil, thank you very much. We got to talk soon. I got to get you on the program here soon. Charles, it's not a show unless you join in here at the beginning. Hi, Pam. Great to see you. Ted, as always, man, you're one of the A-team on the show here. Thank you. And, of course, Dwayne, absolutely. I'm going to get back with you about we've been thinking about the thing you put in your email about merchandise and having an online store. So appreciate that. All right. So it is so good to have my neck here. I am a big fan of his work and a big fan of what he does. And, man, I'm just so blown away that he would take time to be here. He talks about, I'm not even going to tell you what he talks about. We're just going to talk about it, because he could talk about what he talks about a lot better than I will talk about what he talks about. Please welcome my great pal, Brian Fanzo. Man, it is so good to see you, and it's so good to talk. And you've got a house filled with kids too when I see you online, so you're having a heck of a time, pal.
I do. Thankfully, they're at their moms right now, which gives me the break for multiple live streams and things. But I'm a bigger fan of yours, and the fact that you asked me. And I tell you what, I told you I had notifications on when you started this, as I've loved seeing all the different speakers doing live video. But there's something like the way that you articulate things and kind of bring people in has really captivated me every single time. So being on this side is truly my honor. So I say thank you for what you've been doing. Oh
man, I appreciate it, because a compliment means the world no matter who it's coming from. But you are such an expert in this field, and you are such a specialist in how this is done. And man, I really, really appreciate it. I want to talk to you because we've already got a couple of folks writing in about it, Brian, and calling yourself a digital futurist. I mean, this has to be a time that is just amazing for you in terms of here. And in speaking too, we've been going 100 miles an hour and then we hit a brick wall, right? I mean, so could you just start with an overview of what you do and what your field is that you have as expertise?
Sure. So like the digital futurist, although the branding is fairly newer for my brand, it's really what's mapped my entire career, my background. I worked in cybersecurity for the Department of Defense for 9 years out of college. So degree in computer science, business information systems. Ended up getting the highest civilian security clearance that you could get, which was a top secret SCI. And I was on a team that we deployed and managed cybersecurity solutions. And really what my team was in charge of was training, thought leadership, and then collaboration, getting the different organizations to collaborate, which, as you can imagine, getting the Navy to share cybersecurity policies with the Army taught me a lot about collaboration and respecting your elders and chain of command and those kind of things. And then I left that world, although I loved working there. I left that world to be what my dream job, which was a technology evangelist, modeled after Guy Kawasaki with what he did at Apple, sure. Robert Scoble, what he did at Microsoft. And I did that for a data center company for about 2 years. And during that time, I started to kind of build my public persona as far as personal brand, and a lot more in social video, social media. And so for the last a little over 5 years, I've done the entrepreneur side, the speaking piece. And so for me, kind of connecting those worlds, because my first speaking gig was actually in 2005 with the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
That's a heck of a place to start, man.
That's like everyone asked me, am I ever scared on? Never. Like I had general in the front row, full uniform, and my talk was embracing change to reach the millennials, right? And I mean, not only no feedback, but like it was like crickets. And I did 3 trips to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, and for me, a lot of it was getting them to see change, like cybersecurity, and then helping them understand the only way we're going to keep up with change is through collaboration. And so we were deploying SharePoint and those kind of tools. So interestingly enough, like to me, social media was what I've been doing since day one, right? I was deploying, social tools and collaboration tools. And it's just funny how it kind of stepped along. And so my weird niche for early on in my speaking was, I talked about millennials and kind of connection, but I was the guy that was working with marketing departments that had never worked in marketing before, right? And the funny thing is, the more technology we've infused, the more my ability to have that background has kind of been there. And so the digital futurist piece to me, this is, I feel like I spent the last 5 years trying to get people to open their mind to digital, virtual. Well, coronavirus just like forced everybody to do what I've been trying to get them to do. And so now I get to do the piece that I've been looking forward to the most, where it's a lot less convincing them why, and now talking about how and the total possibilities and even where we go in the future.
This is something I've never told you. It's something I hadn't really thought about for quite a while. When I was first getting my speaking started, one of the things I talked about was what my generation was going to bring to the marketplace.
Okay.
And I will never forget. And the folks that are watching from back where I grew up, there was a local celebrity. He was on television, radio, and his name was Milton Metz. And I ran into him, and he said, "So tell me, what do you talk about?" And I told him, and he said, "That will never last." And I thought he meant he said, "No, you'll get older, and all of a sudden you won't be what everybody wants to hear about it." And it struck me when you were saying that, what a smart move it is on your part, because, we've talked so much about millennials. Well, Pete Buttigieg could have been president of the United States. He's a millennial. I mean, it's not like we're talking about kids anymore, obviously. And so it's such a brilliant strategic move on your part.
Well, and the funny thing about that too was, like, the talk that I gave, really big on that was millennial mindset. Yeah. And almost every person's feedback afterwards was like, "Holy cow, you're more of an advocate for non-millennials than you are millennials, and you really kick the millennials in the rear." And I was like, well, when I had a team, I was building out my team, and we were all remote cybersecurity, and this is early 2000s. Cybersecurity's never been sexy. Sure as heck was not sexy then. And so my first 30 people that worked on my team were all older than I was. So I can tell you, for me, it was like the quickest dose of learn how to manage people that are more experienced, elder than you, that might not respect you out of the gate, that you have to gain that. And so when I brought those stories into this conversation, I could win over, like, my number one audience was, associations with people that were all over 50. That's the people that I talk to the best, because I look the part, and I play into that. And then
brand. Yeah.
And then I can relate, and then I can connect the dots. I can see both sides. And so weirdly, getting that feedback all the time. And I have to give credit, Michelle Joyce, shout out to my speaker agent. She was like, "Brian, we're getting this feedback and you're not getting these gigs. We need to reposition you." She's like, why did you tell me no to a digital futurist? And honestly, the reason is when I was kind of, merging in my career, the people that were futurists were people that were predicting what, 2100 were going to look like, right? And they were these things that I was like, I don't want to live in a world that is forecasting things to scare people or the unknown, but I want to help people get prepared for the future. And so I think it took her 2 minutes to convince me, and it's been extremely rewarding. And it's also, for me, for the first time, it allows me to connect my background, because weirdly, as I came back into the speaking space, although I had been speaking both on behalf of the government and then as the face of my data center company, I was an unknown commodity that had to fight for every stage. And I kind of took a little bit of pride in the fact that I didn't need to rely on my security clearance. And most people that knew me early on never knew I went to Iraq or Afghanistan. They didn't. And it wasn't a shame. It was more of like, let me build this credibility. But I think there's also a time where you're like, hey, you should probably be leveraging that.
You realize who I am. I know you would never say that, but I mean, there had to be something in there when you've accomplished that, because my gosh, what? Okay, so I'll never forget. I was doing a series of programs for Juniper Networks, and they sent me to Europe, and I did like 5 gigs, from one end of Europe to another. And the guy that was on before me was a cybersecurity expert, and it was the first time I'd ever really been exposed to that. And it was a hard act to follow, man, because I mean, everybody was just, their jaws were on the floor with the things that we take for granted. Now, many folks I think are relatively new into this because of what the coronavirus has created. So we've heard so much about, security issues with Zoom, for example. How much does the average person who is probably new to many of the technologies, how much do they really need to be worried about security? And if so, what do they need to be doing?
So I think I love the way you set that question up, and I can tell you, and this is not a knock to the cybersecurity professionals that are out there, but if cybersecurity is more of a priority and something more people are talking about, cybersecurity professionals are more in demand. And so I've always looked at having that weird, juxtaposition and how people can balance that, because when something all of a sudden becomes a security flaw or there's something there's almost an incentive for those in that field to amplify the exposure or the attention to it, because it gives them more of that advantage. And it was also part of that struggle when you're in this field, because you're playing defense most of the time and you're playing education. And most people don't care until they're already exposed, which means it's too late. And then if they do care early, you have to question where you get the information from. And so when I look at this all the time, like one of the things that cybersecurity, I feel, has not done a great job on is understanding what we as the users are willing to share, willing to give up, right? Like we're using Facebook for free. We are paying with our data. And the question becomes, do you like that your ads on your Facebook page are customized to you, or would you rather them just be random ads, right? And the difference is giving up your data to get the customized ad versus giving up your data. And so like things like Cambridge Analytica, which was, to me, it was a big farce in the sense where you thought you were giving up your data for this, and they were taking it and selling it for something else. And that is a massive flaw. But it was not Facebook's problem. Facebook had thousands of people that they gave this access for. It was one bad sector that then took it and did bad things. And so when you look at like the Zoom piece of it, right? Like as soon as that came out, Zoom is hackable. Zoom is, and everyone kind of overreacted. And in the security space, we sometimes have an all or nothing solution, right? Like, and I deployed this at the Pentagon one time. Like the passwords were too small. So we were deployed to manage 30 character passwords that had no word sequence in the 30 characters. So we of course deployed it. And then we did a penetration test with like Black Hat penetration test. And we found out we were actually less secure with 30 characters than we were with 6, because the average person wrote it down on a sticky note and put it underneath their keyboard. So we just walked down and picked up their keyboard. So 6 character you memorized, although if I was hacking with a computer, easier to penetrate. 30 character, a lot harder to penetrate, but all I had to do was walk behind you. And so I think that's one of those things. And then there's also like risk versus reward, right? Are you like the reason Zoom beat out Skype, in my opinion, like Skype had the market, even GoToWebinar had the market.
Of course. Yeah.
Skype, every time you send them someone a link, they had to re-download the software, they had to update the drivers, the thing didn't work, they couldn't even get someone to watch it. What Zoom did was they said, hey, send out this link, they're gonna have to click 2 things in their tab, it's gonna be very user-friendly. Zoom explodes. Well, all of a sudden, when we look at like the security flaws, there's some things in there where they're passing some data in clear text and some things going on. But also at the same time, is it attached to my name? Can they see the video? Like when we heard like Zoom is getting hacked, there's a tendency to say they're exposed to your data that you're sharing on Zoom. And for what the average person is like, oh my God, they can see me. Well, we have to ask, like, what you're doing on Zoom, that like, do you care that someone can see you with no audio? Like, and then even if you took it another part, like, do you care that someone can read the chat in your Zoom? And so I think a little bit of it is an education play, but I truly do believe for everyone that's out there, you have to prioritize your data. Like your data is, it's your data, and you have to decide what you're willing to risk, what you're willing to give up. And one of the things I really hope people do is ask the question again in 2020, right? Because if you ask the question in 2016, I can almost guarantee the things you were willing to share online or expose were way different than what you're willing to right now, right? And I think we have a tendency to be like, I would never share that. And you're like, why? And you're like, oh wait, I guess I would now. But like we were kind of set in this way. And so that's where I look at security. I always try to look at the root. I try to look at who's the one amplifying it, right? Is it a media? Is it political? Is it, is it Zoom's? Every one of Zoom's competitor amplified the heck out of that Zoom security flaw. Like,
Oh, they sure did.
like I went to every one of their sites, and it was like
Yeah.
they had their own blog posts, they had their own initiatives, and like one of the things that you have to think about that is like, why would they invest that much time, right? Well, Zoom is still the superior tool, and the numbers have shown, right? I think since the flaw was exposed, they've gained 18% market share, right? So like something ridiculous in that side. So I think there's that, but there's also, I don't want to be all on one side or the other. We kind of have to be, we can't be naive. We can't stick our head in the sand, right? I'm a dad of 3 girls. And, things like sharing my physical location where I'm at, the ability to where, hey, I have more people, and I always tell people, like, when you're thinking about that risk versus reward, also think about it as like who you're trusting or where you're putting the things. Because like weirdly, I trust Facebook to their job is to make money with advertising, which means they need the data to keep me on the site. Therefore, they get no win taking that data and selling it to someone else somewhere else, right? So like one of those things too, we just kind of have to look at it and be like, Facebook, yes, they were exposed, and yes, they need to tighten up who they're willing to put a gold stamp on. But let's face it, 5 years ago, gold stamping companies for data mining was like a no-brainer because no one really valued individual characteristic data. All of a sudden, a couple of years later, when we were like, did you know that you can target based on the eye color of someone? Then it kind of changed. So it's definitely something that we have to take with a grain of salt, do your little bit of research, and then ask yourself, do I want to give up this experience? And the other piece, give up this experience, and then what is the alternative? Like every person is like, Brian, I turned off personalized data on my Facebook page. I was like, well, you realize you still get ads. They're like, yeah. I was like, and they're ads now that annoy you, that you don't like, that have no value, that could be even more polarizing to you. Like, so like to me is like the fact that you turn that off, did it make your experience better or worse? And I think that's one of those things that each individual has to make that decision.
It's so funny. I signed up today. There was something I received about taking the data from my Apple Watch and using it in a 19 data study.
Yep.
And I want to be a part of that. I want to help the researchers do that. But you are so spot on this because 4 or 5 years ago, I would have thought, oh man, I don't want anybody to have my data. I don't want anybody, but now you understand a little bit more. Hey, before we get to the next question, I want to make sure you saw this, Brian. Tim McClure, a fellow Speak and Spiller, says he'll never forget you saying what I really want to do is ramp up my business. Yep, he's.
Tim is a great guy. I know he's been under the weather for a little while too. So, Tim, I hope you're feeling better. Tim's done some amazing things with sports brands and companies, executive up there in Canada that he got me hooked up with New Era because I'm a hat guy, and they sent me a box full of hats from New Era just through his connection. So Tim,
gotta love that. That is so cool. And Charles Coachman is sharing the password of a lot of people out there, probably. So.
Yep.
Oh man. So Brian, okay, so everything seems to be in such a state of flux right now. The situation is so good. I saw a thing come across right before we went on that our governor here in Nevada is going to announce the extension of the shelter-in-place orders, and our mayor here is going crazy. I mean, we're hearing so many different things. But my office is based with a couple of back in Indiana, and they're getting ready to open up the malls this weekend, and here everything is shut down. I mean, it's all over the board. So,
yep.
Could you give us some insight about where you see digital's role in this? And what you see for the future in terms of, are we ever going to get back to the way it was, or has the kind of connectivity that we've established digitally during this going to be kind of the new normal?
So I don't think we'll go back to the old way, right? I think we've my dad turned 68 on April 10th, and we had a birthday on Zoom with him. And my dad doesn't have Facebook. Getting him on Zoom is like a running joke. And he made the comment that it might be one of his favorite birthdays he's ever had, right? And the idea that we are all, my brothers are in Dallas, I'm in Virginia, and we have grandkids on there, all these different things. And so I think part of that is exposure. But I think one of the things that I look at is that for the first time ever, we each are going to have our own opportunity to shape the new normal, right? So no, we're not going to go back to the old way, but now we get to decide what's important, right? And what we value. And the NFL draft, I thought was really interesting. They went virtual. I did a big blog post and video on that. But the listening to Jerry Jones, the billionaire founder of the Dallas Cowboys, the owner of Dallas Cowboys. And one of the things he said was, I don't ever want to draft like I did in the past, because this felt like a family affair that people had access to me and I had access to others. And if you think about how powerful that is, of a brand that's been doing an event offline for forever, and I call them the No Fun League for most people, right. And then they went virtual, and it opened a perspective and opportunity. They would have never included your family in the war room drafting $1 million players, but when they did, it transformed their entire attachment to it. And I think that's how we have to approach this, right? It's like, and I think that the part of this comes in the future too, is virtual is not online versus offline. It's not like all of a sudden we're gonna be able to get out and do something. It's what can we do with these technologies that make when we are offline that much more rich, that's much more connected, right? And I think we still have a tendency that's like, well, when we go back to normal, I'll be online less. Probably true, but are you when you're online in the future, are you gonna be more strategic, more understanding of what you're using, how you can use it, all of the possibilities? Probably. So what does that mean? And then things like working from home, for the longest time, like even the reason we work 9 to 5, right? Like the whole concept of 9 to 5 to me has just been foreign since I remember questioning like my 6th grade teacher, like, I'm confused. Like, people are most productive between the hours, every human being, like, it would just, like those kind of things. And I think I remember my data center, like there are 200 employees. You had to be inside the building. And they said, you know what, we're going to let people work from home, but we get to 400, everyone has to work inside. And I was like, they told everyone couldn't work from home. We lost good employees. Everybody came back in, and I was like, what was the 400 number? And he was like,
yeah, where'd that come from?
Yeah, he's like, oh, it's just kind of like my thoughts on like why, when you're scaling your company this big, you need to have people inside. And so I think this is one of the things, as we move forward, we have to start asking ourselves, okay, the things that we're changing or the things that we want to make happen, how do we want to make them happen? Not how do we used to make them happen, let's go back, but how can we, do we want to make them happen? And then how do we, kind of make that balance? I mean, I think the NFL was such an interesting thing, hearing these coaches and players saying they've had more time with their family than ever in their entire career. Yeah. They're working their dream job. And if we can enable that more, they're like, I will get paid less and I'll work more hours, right? And it's so I think that's where I look at it. It's like we do have to take like a fresh approach to this, but I think it's so cool that we get to decide moving forward what's a priority and what's not. And I mean, we've all kind of been, our priorities have been definitely disrupted in the last, however many weeks. It feels like every day is a week.
Isn't it going to be interesting too? Productivity studies are after this is moved past to see if people are, is there this incredible lost productivity? Because I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think people are going to be less productive. I think it's going to get back to what you're talking about, is that people work in the wheelhouse of when they are most creative and when they get the most done. And,
and I think it's a mindset too. Are we a results-based society, or are we I work from home. I work from home as a government contractor, and I can tell you, and this was 2007 was my first time working from home, and I did every mistake that was under everything, right? Like I went from like being way too lazy to not caring to scheduling golf outings and doing to the other side of like being so scared of being out of sight and out of mind that I worked 80 hours a week, neglected my newborn child, and over calculated. Right. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, it's a team effort, and my spouse has to be involved, and I have to manage my own expectations, all those things. And so I think it takes time. And I also say, like, we can't omit the mental health wear and tear that this has put on us for the next year, 5 years, 10 years. I've been watching some documentaries on people that, are documentaries based on, popular people through the 90s. And I can tell you, I have a different lens that I've been looking at them recently. And part of it's because I think of that and say, when we look back 10 years from now, how many suicides or how many people that are committing themselves into rehab are going to be directly associated to the things that they were exposed to or the world that was, hit here. And so I think that's another one, right? Like the idea of, can we balance this? And if we truly care about our employees and our people, there are some things that we need to recalculate in our priority spectrum. I know that's something you talk about as well, which is why I kind of brought that up, because I love that you kind of address that, because I think it's, it's a delicate topic. And right now the ups and downs are so scary, yet it's hard to complain about your downs because you know there's people that have it worse than you, right? It's
Right.
like it's such a weird, but your downs aren't any less than theirs. It's just, you know, one of those things. And so I do look at the, you know, the new normal that we shape is definitely going to have to evolve and hopefully account for, you know, that mental health. And I think, you know, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is how different would this have been without social media or digital? I mean,
oh my gosh, we talk about that constantly. Is that, I mean, just you and me catching up, you know, just regardless of the fact we're doing this and you know, lots of folks are watching, it's just the connectivity that this has enabled that would not have been possible in past years. Charles Coachman is one of the folks that watches all the time and gets engaged almost every day, and we appreciate him. And this is an issue that I'm not aware of, but he said Zoom's not trusted because of their ties to the China workforce. I'm not aware of that. So how do you get past that? Help
I think our mistrust of China is slightly overly calculated as well. And so, you know, when I worked for the government, and truthfully, like I've been out of cyber now for about 6 years, so I stay up to the trends, but I haven't worked in, you know, hands-on in the field. I have lots of smart friends that are in there full on. But one of the things that I always was, you know, we were securing the Pentagon, both, you know, after WikiLeaks and after a couple, you know, hard drive things. And people would always assume that China was who we were stopping to hack. And China is definitely has a lot of resources dedicated to exposing threats. But the number one threat in cybersecurity in the United States to our infrastructure, to our power grid, to all of our technology is not China. It is individual humans. It's called insider threat. We individually put in an email, a password that we didn't know that someone could then see when someone walked by. Our own human condition is the number one vulnerability of every tool that exists, right? Like my old, pretty much the smartest guy I've ever met, my mentor, Sandeep, would always say, the only way we can guarantee to secure that device for our client is if we unplug it. The only way we'll put our name that it's fully is we'll put it in the compactor and turn it into recycling, right? Like, so like there is like the idea of like, okay, China has, there's some employees of China, they have a support desk in China, but we've also learned, like I work for the Department of Defense, you could not have anyone working for a foreign entity for your tool to be deployed in the Department of Defense. Since then, that's drastically changed, right? Because before we were like, everything had to be America homegrown. Well, then we realized the costs would go up, and we also realized, are we the only ones that have the smart people doing this? And how can we collaborate? So I think, you know, China is definitely something we have to be aware of. They are spending resources towards certain things, but just because of the association, directly linking that to it being a higher risk or more of a hack vulnerability, I would actually argue the fact that Zoom has more people using the advanced features that have never used this kind of technology before is much more of a vulnerability than it is, you know, because another thing, just to be clear, what Zoom got exposed for was able to turn off in your settings. It was just by default was not enabled. It wasn't like they were like, had this glaring error that they didn't know existed. They gave you the option to go this direct, right? So I think that's something, but I mean, I don't, trust me, there's plenty of people in this world that are willing to do bad things. And sometimes I kind of come off as like the pure optimist and beyond, but like, I mean, I had the cyber background. Like for me, it's always like, how do I balance it, right? Like, so for me, like I have my daughters on social media, but I'm also using alerts via, you know, a couple different services that if the words bomb, lockdown, threat, or kidnapping are tweeted or posted on social media within the zip code where my daughters live, I get a push notification to my phone, right? So like I'm from the outside, they're like, oh, you share your daughters, you have that open. Hey, I do. But at the same time, the risk was like, ooh, what if something happens and I'm not aware of it? I'm going to mitigate that risk and I'm going to be okay on this side. So I think that to me, you know, it's just one of those examples of like figuring out ways to prioritize what matters to us.
Catch up on a couple things here. Yes. Charles also mentioned my pal Randy Pinnigan put out a great message about those who work from home. And that's an important aspect, how you lead that and how you manage that and setting the expectations before that. Got this right. Long distance phone companies would have made a fortune if this would have happened.
I actually found a calling card the other day, and I was trying to explain. I was trying to explain to my daughters when I used the calling card, and I was like, "Oh, when I was calling back to your mom whenever I was in Japan," and I was like, and it was always horrible because it was the time difference. And I'd run back to a hotel and I had to dial and put in these 347 numbers in like correct order, and then wait for it to dial. And then my daughter goes, and you got to pay for that? It's like to her, like they should be paying me to go through all of that. So you're right. That would be a good one.
When I was in junior high school, I met this gal, and she lived like 20 miles away, but it happened to be long distance. And I remember a fit when we got the phone bill because I had made these calls that were billed, you know.
Oh yeah, and I would say Jennifer, my partner, she's in Atlanta, and I can tell you we go to bed on Facebook Portal together. And so although she's in Atlanta, I'm here. We're on video, and I mean I'm beyond thankful for that. And I see Charles asked a question about insider threat is human error, either voluntarily or involuntarily, that exposes something from a security idea. So people doing things on purpose, sharing out passwords, leaving a company and selling it, or someone not realizing what they're doing and in turn giving people a back door into something like someone taking a government computer, going to a Starbucks that's an open Wi-Fi connection and leaving your laptop open when you get your coffee. Someone walks by and writes down that password. That is way more of a threat to our way of life than what China's doing from afar. So that's just to clarify.
Tammy has a friend that was on a Zoom meeting that, a guy jumped on there and exposed himself and all this kind of stuff. Well, they're like, oh, is it? Well, come to find out they had, they broadcast, here's how you get in. They didn't have it set up that there was a green room. They put this thing out to goodness knows how many people, and so it was operator error. It was not Zoom error at all.
Well,
hey,
I would say the number one rule for me is that technology will never fix stupid or stop bad people from doing bad things.
Absolutely.
If we can own those two things, like the fact that no technology.
Yeah. Hey man, I did have one big final question before we ended up. You mentioned the NFL draft. How'd the Steelers do?
So we had no first round pick for the first time ever.
Colts traded there, so I'm with you.
We both experience. But we got Minkah Fitzpatrick from Miami last year, and I love the guy. Thought that was a steal. My favorite part of the draft was our third round pick, offensive lineman, diehard Steeler fan, grew up. His entire bedroom was Steeler painted, and so when he got drafted, he's sitting on like a Steeler comforter with to me that was like you don't see that very often, right? Like the super fan getting drafted by their super team. So I was excited about that. I mean, my Steelers were dependent on one guy, Big Ben. Big Ben's healthy, we're gonna make a Super Bowl run. Big Ben's not healthy, we're going to be building for the future. But I just hope we have football, right? I think, for us, especially
to bring us together, don't you think? To have something to cheer for.
The draft and then that Michael Jordan series. I've never been so excited to watch a documentary about a basketball game that I know forward and backwards and every single point about, right? It's like watching Titanic. I knew the boat was going to sink. But like watching that Michael Jordan documentary, I was like enthralled. And I was like, oh, it's because we're like sports, neglected at the moment.
My friend, as a Pacers fan, I keep hoping they're going to win that 7th game in Chicago.
Please, Reggie Miller, please.
Please. I was at the game where Reggie hit the 3 over Michael. That incredible shot. I was there. I
actually know where I was because my best friend's girlfriend was an Indiana Pacers fan. She was the first one I'd ever met growing up in Virginia Beach that was a Pacers fan. And I remember seeing her joy when Reggie Miller hit that shot, right? Like, we have Raiders fans too. Look at that.
Yeah, you bet. Jeff's over in Jeff's one of the most interesting guys I know and just a great guy. He has a plumbing contracting company, and clients of his include Clint Eastwood and all the folks there at Carmel and all that. And Jeff's a big Raiders fan, so I think he's going to be making a bunch.
Are you excited for having the Raiders there in Las Vegas?
I'm such a diehard Colts fan. It's really hard. I mean, I've got to, just because they're here, I guess I've got to kind of like them. But it's really weird because I'm just so it's like you. I mean, wherever you live, you're going to be a Steelers fan.
Yeah, because the Golden Knights, I've never been more impressed with how they took over that city and how like the city adopted them and that whole and I'm a huge hockey fan. And the Penguins, of course, being my team, but the first pick of the Knights was the Penguins goalie, right? Fleury. Yeah. And so but being a part of that and like seeing, and I've loved Las Vegas. I played poker there for many, many years, even was a quote unquote resident for a little while. That like seeing that city just, it was so beautiful to even the arena and I mean, everything. So I was excited for Las Vegas to embrace the Raiders. I was there a couple of weeks ago with MGM. But you're right, like the hardcore fans like support And like there's no such thing as a second team, but it's a team that as long as they're not playing my team, I guess I could.
Right. Exactly. Well, I see. It was easy for Tammy and me because of Indy didn't have a hockey team.
Right.
So yep. I mean, and Vegas doesn't have a basketball team, so that hockey part was really easy. Yep. Yeah, Darcy, I'm with you there. There we go. There's our three things. And Phil supports the professional team in Columbus, Ohio, the Buckeyes.
Yeah, they are, and their fans are as diehard as any professional team. And I was born in Pittsburgh.
No salary cap in Columbus.
I was born in Pittsburgh, and my dad raised me with two things. He said, nothing ever good came from Ohio until Big Ben was drafted, and Philadelphia is really in New Jersey. Those are the two things my dad raised me as a Pittsburgh guy. Those are the two things that I knew.
There you go. See, you transfer that to Indiana, and that's what we say about Kentucky and Gary.
Yeah, there you go.
Every state's got that. You're so right. Hey, Brian, I can't thank you enough, man. This has just been what a delight to hang and talk and everything. And I just can't thank you enough. It was really, really a great experience. And, hey, where should people go to learn more about you? We've got iSocial Fans there as you.
iSocial Fans is on the socials, but brianfanzo.com. So brianfanzo.com is the speaker site. I have all the virtual event resources and stuff up there. brianfanzo.com, and I'm posting a lot of virtual content there right now. A lot of how to present, a lot of this side. But Scott, I tell you what, you are a great mentor and friend and pioneer in this space. And the fact you take time out for little guys like me, and I can tell you the feedback you gave me 2 years ago, you don't know it, but during this craziness where I lost 18 of my gigs in 1 week, I tapped back into your words of wisdom and encouragement to fight through and rededicate myself to, not pivoting away from what I love to do, but to keep on keeping on. So I owe you a lot. I really appreciate not only all the kind words that you've said, but also just you're the guy paving the way for little guys like me to hopefully one day.
You're hardly a little guy, and it means the world to me what you say, and you can see here you've been a great guest. Phil's already saying have him back, and Tim and everybody. So it means the world you take time to do this, Brian. I hope you will come back at some point in the future.
Happy to, always.
Man, I hope things. Whatever is next. I hope it's us getting a chance to get together. I really appreciate it. All right, man. Thanks so much to our guest, Brian Fanzo. It's been great being with you. We'll see you tomorrow on Daily Distinction.